Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on, well, an incredible journey. It marries history, geography, and some really profound theological insights. We're looking at one of the most influential figures in early Christianity. We are diving deep into Paul's missionary journeys. Our mission really is to pull out the most compelling nuggets from this study. We want to help you see not just where Paul went, but how those physical travels dramatically shaped the very foundations of early Christianity. It's about making the maps come alive,
Yeah,
revealing a kind of strategic genius many of us might not fully appreciate.
exactly. And this deep dive, I think, will illuminate the sheer audacity,
Mm.
the strategic brilliance, and that unwavering commitment behind these monumental endeavors. Will move beyond just a list of names and places to really understand their tangible, lasting impact, both then and now.
Okay, let's unpack this. When you think about Paul the Apostle, what comes to mind? For many, it's his letters, right? His theology. But our study really brings home the fact that he wasn't just sitting in a study somewhere. He was dynamic, a traveler undertaking multiple, very strategic journeys across the huge Roman Empire. And his overarching goal, well, to relentlessly spread the gospel message and establish these thriving communities of believers.
What's truly remarkable is the meticulous detail with which the book of Acts chronicles these travels. It's more than just a travelogue. It provides this rich geographical context that is absolutely foundational to grasping how the early church actually took root, how it expanded, and how it faced its first, often brutal challenges. It helps us kind of visualize the landscape of faith development.
So these weren't just random wanderings then. They were incredibly calculated, spirit-led missions. And what stands out to me is that he consistently targeted major urban centers. My first thought is, why there? Wouldn't a smaller, maybe less chaotic community be an easier starting point, perhaps safer? What was the strategic genius behind focusing on those, you know, bustling hubs?
That's a great question, actually, because those cities definitely presented chaos and danger, too. But precisely because they were so chaotic and densely populated, these cities were the ancient world's nerve centers. They were hubs of commerce, culture, communication. Think of them as, I don't know, the internet of their day. A single message introduced there had the potential to ripple out, reaching entire regions far beyond their immediate walls. It was definitely a high-risk, high-reward strategy, but it ultimately proved incredibly effective for rapid dissemination.
Right. High risk, high reward. And speaking of those strategic choices, the map really comes alive when we start looking at which cities became the focal points of his ministry. There are some truly incredible locations that were absolutely pivotal to Paul's work. Let's really zoom in on some of those pivotal places because this is where the story gets its real texture, doesn't it? We have to begin with Antioch in Syria. Our study describes it as the launch point for multiple journeys. So it wasn't just a stop, it was the dynamic, spiritual, and logistical base for these groundbreaking missions.
Indeed. Antioch wasn't just a place Paul visited. It was this diverse, thriving metropolitan melting pot, really ready for the outward movement of the gospel. The church there was incredibly active, not just receiving, but actively sending missionaries. Acts 13 documents this beautifully. It illustrates that for a mission of this magnitude to begin, you needed a community that was both, well, globally minded and deeply rooted in its faith.
Okay. From there, his travels took him to some fascinating places. Next, we journeyed to Philippi in Macedonia. This city is highlighted not just for Paul's preaching, but for his dramatic imprisonment and the truly remarkable conversion of the jailer. You can read about it in Acts chapter 16. It's an incredible example, really, of how even the darkest moments could turn into profound spiritual breakthroughs.
Yeah, the events in Philippi underscore a crucial theme: resilience. Resilience in the face of severe persecution and the surprising ways divine intervention manifests. Paul and Silas were beaten, jailed, and yet in the midst of their suffering, they were singing hymns. Can you imagine? It was through their unwavering faith, even in chains, that God moved powerfully, transforming a brutal jailer into a believer. This wasn't just an external challenge. It became this unexpected stage for the gospel's power to be, well, undeniably demonstrated.
But the challenges didn't just end with physical persecution, did they? From the marketplace of Philippi, Paul's journey then took a significant turn. It led him to Athens, Greece, the intellectual capital of its time. How did a message rooted in Jewish tradition even land in such a philosophical melting pot? Engaging with all those brilliant thinkers on Mars Hill, that must have been something.
That's where we see Paul's incredible intellectual agility. It's quite amazing. The real takeaway from Athens isn't just that Paul adapted. It's how he strategically leveraged their existing cultural touchstones, from their altar to an unknown God to quoting their own poets. He used all that to bridge the gap to a completely new worldview. This wasn't just a communication tactic, it was a masterclass in contextualized theology. It still defines effective cross-cultural engagement today, I think. It shows us that true understanding often starts by meeting people exactly where they are. He wasn't just preaching at them, he was engaging in intellectual discourse on their terms.
Right, meeting them where they are. And we definitely can't overlook Corinth and Achaia. Our study notes Paul's long ministry stay there. And what's particularly crucial is that this is where he penned his famous letters to the Corinthians, right? Detailed in Acts chapter 18. So this wasn't just a visit, it was a deeply formative period for both Paul and the early church.
Absolutely. What this highlights is how intimately the spiritual climate and the specific issues within each city directly influenced Paul's theological writings. Corinth was, well, notoriously diverse and often morally complex, rife with internal divisions, ethical challenges. The questions, the struggles, even the moral failings within that Corinthian church became the very basis for foundational Christian doctrine that we still study and apply today. His letters weren't these abstract treatises, they were living responses to real-world problems.
But the challenges didn't stop with intellectual debates or internal church struggles, did they? Moving further to Ephesus in Asia Minor, Paul encountered a much more visceral form of opposition. Our study vividly details the dramatic riot over Diana that erupted there. I mean, wow. For someone whose message was about peace and grace, provoking such a dramatic public upheaval seems like a pretty high-stakes move. Was this an intentional disruption on Paul's part, or was it just an unforeseen consequence of his profound impact?
It was definitely a consequence of his profound impact. It really shows the gospel's disruptive power, actually. The growth of the church in Ephesus was so significant, so fast, that it directly challenged and threatened the livelihood of the local idol makers and silversmiths. Their business was tied to the worship of the goddess Diana, you see. So this wasn't merely a religious disagreement. It was an economic and cultural confrontation, straight up. It demonstrates the direct opposition Paul faced when the gospel genuinely challenged these deeply established economic and religious systems. It really underscores the immense courage required to persist in such environments.
Yeah, courage is definitely the word. And as we follow Paul's journeys, we eventually see him making his way back to Jerusalem and Judea. And that's where he faced arrest and trials, as recorded in Acts chapter 21. This wasn't the end of his travels, though, but rather the beginning of his final, momentous journey. A journey that eventually led him under house arrest to Rome, Italy, the very heart of the imperial center. And somehow the gospel still miraculously reached people there.
It's truly a testament, isn't it, to the unstoppable nature of his mission. His imprisonment, rather than silencing him, served this profound, almost ironic purpose. It brought the message of Christ directly to the very heart of the Roman Empire. From a prisoner's perspective, he was confined, sure, but the gospel itself was unchained. It was spreading even through his trials and appeals to Caesar. It's a powerful illustration, I think, of how God can use even our deepest constraints for his greatest purposes.
Oh, beyond just tracking the places he visited, what does this study really tell us about why these journeys matter so much? To us today, thousands of years later, what's the deeper meaning we can extract?
Well, one of the most critical insights is how the specific cultural and religious challenges Paul encountered at each location fundamentally shaped his teachings. Whether he was confronting idol makers in Ephesus, or debating with philosophers in Athens, or enduring imprisonment in Philippi, each encounter wasn't just an obstacle, It honed his arguments, it refined his theology, and it directly influenced the practical and doctrinal content of his letters. His writings are a living response to the specific needs and contexts he encountered on those journeys.
So understanding the maps, understanding the context of these places, it doesn't just make the story interesting, it actively helps us understand his letters better. It's like the study says, geography and theology intersect. That makes perfect sense.
Exactly. Maps aren't just for navigation. They're essential tools for biblical literacy, really. They help us visualize how the terrain, the specific travel routes, the political and cultural boundaries of the day, how all that added immense depth to his message. And consequently, to our reading of Scripture. When you understand the spiritual climate of a city like Corinth, his letter to them just takes on a whole new layer of meaning. It really does.
And we just can't ignore the sheer physical toll. The study vividly describes Paul's endurance and sacrifice. He covered thousands upon thousands of miles, often under harsh conditions, enduring shipwrecks, beatings, multiple imprisonments. It almost feels, well, beyond human endurance. It really begs the question, what kind of conviction, what kind of drive kept him going through all of that?
It's truly staggering, isn't it, when you really map it out? Our sources emphasize that this wasn't just about Physical grit, though, I mean, he clearly had that in spades. This was a profound, almost mystical conviction, a sense of divine urgency rooted in his encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus. He believed he'd have been personally called, to carry this message, and that made the immense personal cost almost secondary to the mission itself. It was a level of dedication that transformed suffering into purpose.
So what does this all mean for us today? For you listening right now, what's the enduring legacy of the journeys that our study ultimately points to?
Well, the churches Paul planted across the Roman Empire became foundational to Christian doctrine and community. They served as vital spiritual anchor points for generations. And, as we've noted, his letters to these specific churches form such a significant living portion of the New Testament. So, by studying his journeys geographically, looking at the maps, we truly deepen our appreciation for the monumental historical and spiritual impact of his ministry. His travels physically laid the groundwork for the global faith we know today. It's quite something.
What stands out most to you from this deep dive into Paul's missionary journeys? For me, it's that audacious blend of strategic planning and sheer raw resilience Paul displayed. It's just incredible. It reveals the immense effort, the sheer grit, and the profound spiritual leading behind spreading beliefs that continue to shape the world.
Yeah, I agree. This study reveals that these journeys were far more than just travel. They were a meticulously planned, spirit-led, and deeply sacrificial endeavor. And they quite literally laid the groundwork for the global spread of Christianity. It really compels us to consider, doesn't it? How might understanding the precise physical and cultural landscape of any historical event deepen your appreciation for its impact and for the commitment of those involved?
That's a great question to leave folks with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we can't wait to explore more fascinating topics with you next time.